Okay, we're very lucky today to have Wald from the University of Michigan, who will talk to us about the anti-Semitism scare in colleges and universities. Before we go into that, let me just show this graphic to show that our next and probably our last Zoom will be with Jeff. I got the wrong one up. The last one will be with Jeff Halper. I think I've got the Jeff Halper one. Here it is. We'll be with Jeff Halper, and it'll be on Sunday, April 20th at 10 in the morning, because Jeff is talking to us from Israel.
Oh, okay.
With that, I'm going to stop the share. And we're all feeling helpless and in big doo-doo with the attacks by the Trump administration on colleges and universities and on the people who are standing up against genocide. And this is even becoming criminal. And worst of all, of course, it's not helping us at all. It's not making Jews or humanists any safer. Our speaker today has been involved with these progressive issues since high school. I'm really amazed at that. Dick Plotkin, who is on the call, also became politically woke in high school. I didn't become politically woke until I was in graduate school. When Alan Ward got his bachelor's degree in Antioch and his master's and PhD in Berkeley, he was politically active through that. And through his 40 years or 35 years at Michigan, he's maintained political activism on a range of issues. As an emeritus professor, of course, he's got a lot of publications and is on many committees and honors. And his most interesting book is called The New York Intellectuals, The Rise and Decline of the Anti-Stalinist Left from the 1930s to the 1980s. It's a 1987 book, which was so interesting it was republished in 2017. And one of the most interesting things I think he's going to tell us about today is that the situation we're in today is not brand new, that it reflects things that happened in at least the McCarthy era in the 50s and maybe other times. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to Alan. I'm going to ask everyone to mute themselves. Alan will talk for 35 or so minutes. And then, of course, we'll have a Q&A, which I'll moderate. So Alan, take the floor, please.
Okay, well, thanks, Jeff, and to everybody else for giving me this chance to present in this Zoom discussion. As you know, the topic is what many people are calling the anti-Semitism scare. It's something that's happening mainly at colleges and universities, but elsewhere in society. And it's being called that because there's so many extraordinary parallels with the Red Scare of the 1950s. Now, one can't cover everything because of the attacks that are going on campuses and everywhere else. They're coming so fast and furiously, they're flooding the zones so you can barely keep up. So I'm going to just focus on one slice of the scare, and that's what's happening with college and university faculty. Of course, you know, faculty are not the only or they're not the most important targets of political repression today, but the faculty situation is what I've been following most carefully. I'm on the academic council of the Jewish Force for Peace. I'm involved in a faculty group, Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine, and so on. Perhaps you'll have follow-up sessions on some of the other topics if you continue, especially in regard to what's happening at Columbia University with this arrest of Mahmoud Khalil. David French at the Times yesterday referred to Columbia University as patient zero in the outbreak of censorship and repression. So that's an important area. I have a special title for tonight's presentation. I'm calling it Smokescreen Anti-Semitism and the Instruction of History. And the first question I'm addressing is, Have we been here before? And of course, my answer is yes. There are no doubt some novel, there are curious features to what's going on today, but the anti-Semitism scares, it's far from the first right-wing assault on universities and academic freedom. So we're not in an entirely unfamiliar terrain. About those earlier dark chapters in U.S. history, of which there are many, there's one thing we should have learned with relative certainty, and that is once a period of political repression indisputably sets in, the situation only gets worse. Once a witch hunt gets going, they never stop at the original targets. They go farther. Now, the advent of this kind of a dreadful era usually comes as a slope, not a sudden switch. And so there's the possibility of preventive action so that one can have hopes of moderating that subsequent slide in the early stages of the repression. But we also know another thing, which is that when you're faced with a bully, what gets rewarded gets repeated. Deference only teaches power just what it can get away with. And the problem is that even now, which is several months following that 2025 awful presidential inauguration, many of our colleges, university colleagues, faculty, and administration are exhibiting a degree of murkiness in their assessment of what this future is going to bring for the culture of academic freedom and free speech. Some are actually in favor of making concessions right away in our programs and our policies, and even sacrificing elements of our community, those who are most targeted. George Mason University, Virginia Commonwealth University, they've dropped all their DEI course requirements. DEI stands for diversity, equity, inclusion. That's very important. It's the replacement of affirmative action. Many schools have eliminated any kind of a DEI statement from their websites, including Columbia, and more adopting what they call institutional neutrality, policies which in this particular atmosphere are functioning to silence informed opinions, and of course, they're very selectively enforced. Now, a lot of administrators and some faculty are imagining that this is going to satisfy rather than encourage those schoolyard bullies in the federal and state government, and in the external or conservative organizations that have been organized to scare alumni about alleged anti-Semitism on the campuses. That is, they want to placate the very people who are making the threats against our students and our faculty. Now, it's true that the original events of the Trump inauguration really appeared to be more bonkers than any kind of devious calculation. We had King Trump up there ascending his throne, surrounded by his royal family. He had a retinue of billionaire tech bro courtiers around him. And the first crazy act he did was to announce that he was going to rename mountains and seas. He was going to change Mount Benally to Mount McKinley. He's going to change the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, which he claims to have done. And he also announced he was going to seize territory from all these other countries like Denmark and Panama and so on. It just seems so loopy and weird and so stupid and evil that you just thought he was out of control and was going to make some mistakes, and that would backfire and perhaps bolster the opposition and create divisions in his own camp. But it would be a mistake to see what he's been doing as separate from what had been happening in the year before, because it didn't just start with Trump. It just started under the Biden administration, and it's been getting worse. And there are all these echoes of historical narratives that have played out before. So my argument is that history may not repeat, but it can instruct. And I'm going to talk a bit about academic freedom here, but I'm not going to do it in the abstract because the importance and defense of academic freedom now are intertwined with certain political issues that are being used by both federal and state governments, as well as pliant university administrators, to twist the meaning of academic freedom and destroy its efficacy. And I'm also going to accentuate the historical aspect of all this, partly because that's my field. I'm a specialist in dissident 20th century writers and intellectuals. the ones who paid the heaviest price in those dark chapters I've been referring to. And I'm eternally haunted by the introductory sentence of a book, Frederick Jameson's 1981 book, The Political Unconscious, begins, "Always historicize." And when I historicize what's happening, I see a very disturbing context for this kind of multi-front assault on academic freedom that I say began even a year before Trump's election. And I'm talking here about the repression of speech and action of the protests that's been going on against the U.S.-enabled assault by the Israeli state on the people of Gaza. And these various authoritarian offenses that have occurred on the universities did begin under the liberal Democrats. And now in 2025, Trump has taken power at what could well be one of those turning points in U.S. history. Because today we're looking at a U.S. national shift to the right that's part of a worldwide swing toward reactionary and religious nationalism. It's mostly Christian nationalism, but it's not totally Christian. And this is reshaping the global order. We're not only talking here about Europe, the leaders such as Meloni in Italy, Orban in Hungary, Kickl in Austria, or organizations such as the National Rally Party in France or Alternative Fraternity. We're talking about worldwide. That is Modi in India, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Milei in Argentina, Bukele in El Salvador, and of course, Netanyahu in Israel. And so it's important to add that when Frederick Jameson began that book with the slogan, "Always historicize," he followed it up. He said, in asserting that watchword, he was talking about a trans-historical imperative. And what he meant was that there are patterns in the types of thinking and behavior that gain ascendancy following certain types of historical events. And that's why I'm asking this question, have we been here before? Because just as we can see a family resemblance between what's happening in the US and the evolution of an international right, there are also signs of something else. We're seeing a similitude in academic thinking and behavior from earlier moments when our freedom to speak and teach critically was also under assault. Now, sorry, here. Let me present just a quick review of some of the kinds of repressive acts that have been going on against faculty since the fall of 2023, just so you know what I'm talking about. There's a professor, Steve Thrasher, who holds the chair of social justice at Northwestern University. He had all his classes canceled after he participated in an encampment that was demanding divestment from Israel in April 2024. And Steve apparently collaborated with students in trying to set up a protective line between the police and the students, and he was therefore charged with obstructing an officer. And Northwestern University has now announced that it's going to investigate all his social media accounts as well. Then there's Richard Heyman, who was a longtime lecturer at the University of Texas, Austin, and he was fired by email after the police charged him with shouting expletives at a protest and gesturing in a threatening manner with his water bottle, which you know is a very violent weapon, a water bottle. Then there's Ruha Benjamin. You might have heard of her. She's a professor of African American Studies, a MacArthur Fellow at Princeton University. She's being investigated for her pro-Palestinian activism. There's Catherine Franke, who's gotten a lot of publicity. She's the distinguished Columbia University law professor who was forced to leave her position following an investigation that was sparked by some comments she made on the program Democracy Now! Because in an interview, she expressed her concerns about harassment of pro-Palestinian activists by former Israeli soldiers who were studying at Columbia. There's also Tiffany Willoughby Herod. She's a University of California Irvine professor of global international studies. She's been charged with 3 misdemeanor accounts, including allegedly resisting arrest at the time of a pro-Palestine protest in May 2024. There's Professor Michel DeGraff at MIT. He received letters of reprimand, and a pay raise was withheld because of a dispute in his department, because he requested to give a course on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. There's a justice studies professor named Sang-Hee Keel. She's at San Francisco State University. And she was suspended since May 2024 because of her involvement as an advisor to pro-Palestinian student groups on the campus. And there's actually now an investigation that could result in her termination. She's accused of, quote, directing and encouraging students to violate university policies and engaging in harassing and offensive conduct and comments directed toward colleagues.
What was her name again?
Her name?
Yeah.
Sang-Hee Keel, Sang-Heakil, San Jose.
Okay.
Probably you've heard of Maura Finkelstein. She's the tenured chair of anthropology at Muhlenberg College in New Jersey. She was fired from her tenured position last May because of social media posts about Zionism that some said were offensive to Jews. So what we can see in all this is that the campus administrators are focused on carrying out repression against pro-Palestinian activism in several ways. One is to institute new restrictions on campus protests, rules that were not previously enforced or maybe not even on the books. Another is to feed whatever forms of faculty and student consultation had existed on the campus to the wood chipper. And a third, and I think the most dangerous, is to carry out punishments and even dismissals by claiming that the administration is protecting the, quote, safety of Jewish students. Now, this last deception is mostly engineered under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. You've probably been hearing about this. The strategy is to treat outspoken anti-Zionist opinions, especially certain slogans, certain phrases, certain ideas, as if they were anti-Semitic discrimination against what's called a protected class due to race, color, or national origin. I'm quoting from the Civil Rights Title VI. The allegation is that anti-Zionism, in one statement, is not being understood to be the targeting of an ideology or a state policy, which is, normally the intention of criticizing Zionism. It's alleged to be aimed at harassing a protected class of students due to their national, quote, national origins. And the key phrase here is national origins, which is supposed to refer to your country of birth or ancestry, as well as to physical, cultural, or linguistic characteristics. The deception is to act as if the political ideology of Zionism actually denotes anyone Jewish, even though, as we all know, most Zionists in the US are not Jews. They're mostly Christian Zionists, about 30 million against about 5 million Jews who might consider themselves Zionists in some vague way or another. And of course, all Jews are not even Zionists. So by weaponization of this false conflation, Zionist equals Jew, they have an extortion scheme that becomes operable. That is, if a university fails to act against what a claim of a violation of Title VI, that is, they don't respond to some claim of harassment or a hostile environment aimed at this protected class of Jews, that university can be punished by losing millions of dollars of federal funding. And so, whenever politicians want to neutralize a campus because there's been progressive political activity, and by the way, that's often the case where there's a substantial Jewish component because Jews tend to be radical on campuses. Whenever they want to punish that campus, there's that financial motivation for the university to find some new method of disciplining people in order to avoid losing that funding under Title VI. And it's even more bizarre that most of the alleged Title VI violations we see are based on complaints about the personal social media accounts of faculty, which, most people regard that as extramural speech, that you have a First Amendment right. What's happening is that there are individuals and organizations, and sometimes they're students on your campus, or sometimes they're outsiders, who are monitoring your accounts because they're suspicious of you and they're searching for political ammunition to get you. If they get the ammunition, they then go to the university administrators, and some of them have set up offices to take these complaints. And they complain that what they observed on your social media account made them feel emotionally uncomfortable and anxious. That's the threat, uncomfortable. And this allows an accusation that the professor's speech or writing, whether it's extramural or intramural, is negatively impacting the students' access to education. Now, there are additional complaints about Title VI that are ascribed to pro-Palestinian faculty involving a distorted characterization of things that are assigned to be read in classes or topics that might be used in a classroom. One supposed anti-Semitic critique is when a professor uses the assessment of the Palestine-Israel conflict through the framework of a variant of colonialism known as settler colonialism. And this is falsely represented by supporters of the Israeli state as a call for the annihilation of the Jewish population. Another critique they claim is anti-Semitic is when you question the present-day Israeli state as some kind of lawful form of self-determination, not because you object to the self-determination of a state that is Jewish, but because authentic self-determination doesn't mean displacing the majority of the indigenous population and then instituting apartheid. So when anti-Zionists, like myself, argue for the normalization of the Israeli state as a modern pluralistic democracy, the pro-Zionists experience the equivalent of an anaphylactic reaction because they imagine that they're hearing, quote, the destruction of the Jewish state. However, if you look at what the major spokespersons for the anti-Zionist left say, people historically like Edward Said or in books like 100 Years' War in Palestine, it's clear that it's not the destruction that's the goal, it's creating state forms with equality and not ethnic supremacy.
Right.
And what the evidence is showing is that those protests and scholarly protests that deeply contest Zionist and pro-Israel positions, and especially ones that indicate that current events are not some aberration of Zionism, but they're more a realization of Zionism. These are the ones that are denounced as anti-Semitic. And the object is to make this alternative understanding of this history taboo. And instead, what's being promoted are variations of the view that the bloodshed in Israel-Palestine is the product of the centuries-old longest hatred of Jews, as well as a furtherance of Holocaust anti-Semitism. But the point is that whether scholars like it or not, you have to name colonial subjugation, and you have to understand its implications in order to reach some kind of an understanding of what's going on and what might possibly clarify and resolve the biggest challenge we face, which is to create equal coexistence through the abolition of Jewish colonial privilege. Now, also, when you reduce the whole matter to eternal Jew hatred, you create a frame of mind which leads to the exaggeration of one's discomfort, which means that pro-Zionists will be more likely to perceive student criticisms of the Israeli state as somehow imperiling to Jews as Jews. An unclear chants, and many chants and slogans are not clear, chants like from the river to the sea, or symbols of solidarity that people don't understand. They don't know what a Palestinian flag looks like compared to a Hamas flag, and or wearing a keffiyeh, or unfamiliar language like intifada, which just means shaking off. These are inaccurately processed as if they were menacing intimidation when they're mainly a symbol of solidarity. Of course, some people might want to see alternative approaches to reaching the public that don't involve militaristic sounding, the beating of drums and waving of flags and stuff like that, or using terms that can easily be misrepresented. But none of these chants or icons meet the standard of hate speech. They can't qualify as something punishable unless they're combined with the imminent threat of a physical harm. Okay, Now, there are a lot of other problematic issues at work at involving university culture beyond what I'm citing, but I'm trying to emphasize that this kind of political repression is at the forefront of the assault on academic freedom and free speech as we're getting deeper into 2025. On the one hand, the Trump administration has now launched investigations through the Department of Education into a group of at least 60 universities on the grounds that, quote, widespread anti-Semitic harassment has been reported. It's a quote. This is obviously intended to frighten faculty and administrators all across the country because they fear they're going to lose billions of dollars in federal funding if they don't demonstrate compliance by cracking down with even more draconian measures against speech and protest around Palestine. At the same time, the Trump regime is attacking this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, with the claim that the promotion of anti-Semitism is part of DEI's activity because it educates around racism and colonialism, which they see automatically anti-Semitism. So we could talk about comparisons of the day with a lot of things. You know, the World War I era had a Red Scare. There was the Little Red Scare of 39-41. You've probably read something about that. In 1990s, there were all those attacks on political correctness, many other times. But the closest similarities to the present situation can be found in the repression at universities in that post-World War II era that's commonly known as McCarthyism, even though it started long before McCarthy came on the scene. The context of that time is important. It was the decline of New Deal politics set off against Cold War reaction. And the context today is important because it's the legacy of all that activism, especially after 2008, on behalf of millennial socialism, the Occupy movement, trans rights, Black Lives Matters, and Palestinian solidarity, set off against the rise of this new international right that I've been talking about. And the pattern of academic repression is amazingly similar. First, in the 1950s, the federal government took the initiative by sending FBI agents to universities and threatening the universities with consequences if they didn't clean up their house. And then the university administrators quickly announced that they would defend academic freedom and defend free speech from communist conspirators by firing those who didn't cooperate in public congressional hearings. And today, we're seeing pretty much the same pre-capitulation and anticipatory obedience that is handing over power before one has to, adjusting one's behavior before there's any actual coercion. The federal government, and this was under Biden and Harris, I emphasize, they started things off with threats. They hauled the elite college presidents before Congress, you recall, in late 2023. And immediately afterwards, those university administrations barreled ahead to clean house, which leaves Trump to simply kick down an open door in 2025. Also similar then and now is the weaponization of certain key terms of demonization, a new identity for the subversive person. A communist in the 1950s became a free-floating signifier to mean an agent of Stalin, a conspirator, potential spy, disloyal citizen, even if the targeted faculty member had only signed some petitions back in the 1930s or had even separated from the Communist Party years before. And today, a targeted anti-Semite refers to all sorts of critics of Zionism, including, by the way, religious Jews who supposedly create a hostile environment that violates Title VI. Of course, there's no doubt that, actual Jew hatred is growing in the West, and it's something that has to be stamped out. Anti-Semitism, it's not a delusion. We can see its presence in many places, and just recently in the support of the MAGA leaders for the neo-Nazi Alternative for Germany party, or in all those Nazi salutes and puns that they've been making. But it debilitates our fight against powerful state-backed anti-Semitism if one redefines an anti-Semite to make it synonymous with someone with student activists who criticize what has become a supremacist ideology now that has taken on ethno-state political form in Israel. So from what I can tell, others may disagree, when it comes to most of the accusations of left anti-Semitism, what we have is a mix of gross oversimplifications, cherry picking, and personal interpretations that are presented as fact. And all of these end up enabling genocide denialists to commit definitional theft. That is, their definition of anti-Semitism. It's not about accuracy, it's about domination. And it's really painful to see so many liberals voicing the same kind of defamatory distortions, that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and that these protests are pro-Hamas controlled and so on. This has really helped to propel Trump and his henchmen into power. Now, perhaps these liberals imagine that equating anti-Zionist protests with anti-Semitism and punishing protesters is going to result in some kind of temporary political advantage. But in this instance, they're giving that important label, anti-Semitism, about the same valence as the label terrorist had under the Assad regime in Syria. Years from now, when we look back in shame at what's been happening, the few people with consciences may have to spend the rest of their lives avoiding mirrors. Now, what is also analogous between the 1950s and today is that the assault on communists and on then and anti-Semites today, they're pretexts for going after bigger fish. The 1950s witch hunters, they had two aims. First, they wanted to frighten and discipline the entire campus and the broader public to accept the Cold War strategy of the United States. They wanted silence. They wanted self-censorship ruling academic culture. Second, they wanted to use the communism issue, like the anti-Semitism issue today, to beat back existing radical movements as a whole. And now in the late 1940s, these were a burgeoning post-war labor and civil rights movement. There was the forward push of women to continue the independent role they assumed on the home front of World War II and so on. Today, the larger aim seems to be to destroy the gains made by DEI, trans rights, immigrants' rights, women's control of their bodies, progressive unions, the environmental movement, similar social justice causes, and perhaps even the authority of leading universities as a whole. And this is what is meant by smokescreen anti-Semitism. The Trump administration and their right-wing allies are making a false promise of promoting Jewish safety on the campuses as a smokescreen to carry out their repressive and their very dangerous agenda. This serves to obscure, to confuse, and create cover. It's a falsehood that also distracts from MAGA's own very real anti-Semitism. And of course, it drives a wedge between Jews and other minorities who should be joining together to oppose these repressive actions. We could say a lot more about similarities of now and the 50s. For example, there are a lot of incentives now, as there were back then, for snitching and for blacklisting. Over the past year, a lot of university students have been coached to file those Title VI complaints. Professors have been doxxed on websites. Canary Mission is sort of analogous to things in the past. The Trump administration has been warning federal employees that they should report any, quote, DEI activist, or they're going to face consequences and so on. There's also the publication of names. That was big in the 50s, red channels. You've probably heard of that. Today we have websites called Stop Anti-Semitism with the names of students, faculty, and so on. There's a production of books that elaborate the conspiracy thinking in both periods. In the McCarthy era, the popular one was Hoover's Masters of Deceit, 1958. Today, it's a book like Project Esther, A National Strategy to Combat Anti-Semitism, which just came out. None of this is to suggest that, the communist supporters in the 1950s had an accurate view of the situation in the Soviet bloc. And you shouldn't imagine that Team Palestine and Team DEI are perfect today. Dissident movements they're comprised of humans like you and me and so on. We all have flaws. They can produce individuals and factions who say and do counterproductive, or sometimes they just do dumb things. But that does not invalidate the cause. What's central to remember is that the firings in the 1950s had nothing to do with the quality of teaching or scholarship, and the witch hunt today is based on a biased and selective targeting of specific forms of political critique. So what can we do to prevent the kind of really full-scale rout that occurred in the 1950s? Well, obviously, there shouldn't be any pre-capitulation. Rather, we've got to find unity and a means to win over a majority. And to do that, I think there's two main, somewhat distinct routes. One is to fight repression by creating a greater understanding of the politics of the social movement that's being demonized. And we can start to do that by refusing to be the characters that the right and the pro-Zionist are fabricating, the ones who are supposedly making these, quote, anti-Semitic statements and that they claim that we say. Now, to be clear, I think it's only a small number of people who are saying ambiguous things. But, the pro-Zionists give these unfounded meaning. They claim that they're widespread and so on. And they create a fiction that allows them to fight a, quote, anti-Zionism that's of their own creation. Now, we do know that Zionism has a complex history. There have been several varieties of Zionism. But I think that if people really understood what Zionism looks like from the standpoint of its victims and what's actually happening in the Middle East, we could achieve a counter-hegemonic shifting of public opinion, just as we did on civil rights, on Vietnam, on South Africa, gay marriage, and many other issues. So this means there are responsibilities on the part of those who are actively supporting the causes that are being attacked, and especially this hot-button issue of stopping the genocide against Palestinians. If one is committed to getting the US and Israel off the backs of the Palestinians, you have to put out your views in a frank but non-arrogant way. Because most students, and also most faculty and the public, they have very little understanding of the history and practice of Zionism as it is operated in the colonial world. They often base their entire perspective on Zionism as being a reasonable response to European anti-Semitism. And that has some plausibility because Jews were simply not allowed by immigration restrictions to escape to the countries where they really wanted to go, which was mainly to the United States. Yet the genuine and the horrific past oppression of Jews or of any other group cannot be used as an excuse for present-day violations of human rights on a grand scale. And to explain these facts, we've got to make full use of teach-ins, op-eds, pamphlets, Zoom classes, radio, TV interviews, TikTok, boycotts, community meetings, dorm discussions, debates, militant but nonviolent sit-ins, die-ins, intelligent disruptions, civil disobedience, and so on. And what is more, we cannot abandon the academic courses that treat these issues with thoughtful complexity. And that means we've got to create environments where Palestinian voices can be heard and serious scholarly work from all angles on the region, on varieties of racism, including anti-Semitism, can be assessed and understood. And this is accomplished by imparting and comparing critical tools. Now, if a university actually forbids these kinds of classes, and it's kind of looks to me like that's happening, we should follow our predecessors by setting up our own uncensored freedom schools off campus and in churches and in union halls. If we don't use what political freedom we have, we're going to surely lose it. And we can't let the pre-capitulators steal our future. The second route to defending university culture is an academic freedom campaign itself. It is advocating the right to hold and express our opinions, including the right to demonstrate without being pepper sprayed or roughed up by campus police. And here we're going to have to ally with people who don't agree with us on Palestine or even on DEI, but who do support our rights. And of course, that's not going to happen if we shame them for not going all the way with us or failing to pass some purity test apropos particular beliefs. Partisans in support of Palestinian self-determination are not going to be able to build alliances or even a sizable movement to stop this genocide if they treat as a traitor those who don't line up with their specific analyses of exactly how one supports the right of resistance. So, in conclusion, what worries me most about the parallels between today and the 50s is that we seem to have learned so little from these past experiences. Now, certainly there are some committed faculty who are doing their best to fight back. That's mainly through the circulation of supporting petitions for those who are maltreated, public meetings, some teach-ins. Some are witnessing and going on demonstrations and so on. But really, what we saw from the college presidents at the congressional hearings last year, that's setting the tone for what's happening. A kind of existential terror at the Trump shows bullying and their financial threats as if anticipatory compliance is the only option available. Some are calling this mad surrender disease. Now, the fact is, the reality can be that there's a foundation for building a majority alliance of people at many universities if we reach out to the community and to the unions and other elements of society. And what is required is the formulation of broad demands, ones that unify people, and staying off the hot button, I'm sorry, the button pushing, provocative, shaming, all the self-righteous stuff that's going on. You know, all it takes is for one unhinged provocateur to cry, quote, "Zio bitch," at some demonstration, or raise a sign saying, quote, "Israel deserves 10,000 October 7th. And the New York Times, they run major opinion essays. You've seen them, that millions of people read. And the right-wing outrage machine can fasten onto these incidents like lampreys. At the same time, you can have a faculty and staff group for Palestine of hundreds of people who work for weeks on well-crafted, thoughtful statements, and so that goes entirely unnoticed. Now, of course, our job is not to police the left; it's to work harder to promote more effective strategies. And I think these strategies have to be for collective struggle, they have to be democratically controlled. They can't be individualist actions, elitist, spray painting. A small group goes out and spray paints and so on. You have to find the most effective ways to build organizations and increase collaboration with people that you haven't won over yet. And as I've indicated, defending academic freedom and autonomy, it's going to have to be waged on these two fronts. On the one hand, we have to defend academic freedom, and the other hand, we have to clarify the politics of the social justice movements. And probably for campus repression, and especially defending the right to speak on Palestine, we do need a national organization that can mobilize hundreds of thousands of people in the streets to make clear-cut, easily understand political demands on the U.S. government, as well as on institutions that have financial investments in the Israeli state. We should promote BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions with intelligent choices of what to boycott. We should promote education that explains what anti-Semitism actually is. We may have to come up with our own better definitions. We need a national clearinghouse of lawyers to defend the victims of repression and organize defense committees. Groups like Palestine Legal, the ACLU, they should be supported and expanded. And there should be global dimensions to the struggle. We need to promote link-ups with parallel movements, co-thinkers around the world. What we know is that having used American colleges and universities as a case study, and quite a few scholars have shown that anything short of militant rejection of the witch hunt of the 1950s only served as grist for the rationalization-producing mills that enabled administrators to persecute faculty. And that is now, we see that at each step, universities made the mistake of slavishly following this pressure from the right, very quickly, shamelessly, abandoning any legitimate claim to being havens for dissent. And I'm afraid the echoes of this past are now quite deafening. And I'll stop there and take other opinions, questions, whatever you prefer.
Well, thank you very much. That was an amazing growth of understanding. And so I'm going to start by calling on people in order. And Uri had his hand up 20 minutes ago. So first Uri and then Tony Litwinko, if you want to make a comment, please raise your hand like Uri and Tony have by going to the reaction, the react heart on the bottom of your screen. So Uri, go ahead.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. I mean, I don't know the whole history of the Reds here in the United States in the 50s. I just read about it, but you have a vast knowledge and I appreciate it. I just wanted to add a few pointers to what you said. First of all, somehow, I think it started with Ben-Gurion, we decided to collapse the distinction between Judaism and Zionism, as if they are equivalent or synonymous words, which they are completely not. But a lot of people, especially with very shallow knowledge, cannot tell you the difference or don't even know the difference. And I think this is being taken advantage by a lot of people who actually like to stir the whole pot. So basically for them, everything is the same, because it goes back to in 75, Zionism was declared as a racist organization. In 1993, the United Nations reversed itself and says Zionism is not a racist organization. So that even added to the confusion. So that's one point. Now, you mentioned the usage of all kind of slogans that they don't have a clue about. So from the river to the sea can cut both ways. Most people don't know that, but the right-wing Likud and Jabotinsky, that was their slogan. Actually, they rattled the new King Abdallah recently because it came up again and they say, yes, this is going to be from the river to the sea, but we're going to take the other side of the river. So that's just kind of like an addition to that conversation that you said. And when you know a little bit of the distinction, it right away, it kind of jumps at you. And another point, the other day, Trump, in order to shame Schumer, I think Wednesday or Thursday, he wanted him to vote for the closure. So he basically said, Schumer is not a Jew, he's a Palestinian. As if by divine force, God told Trump, you can distinguish the Jews. You know, is it Jewish or is not a Jewish? Based on the fact that your daughter converted to Judaism, is that your claim to fame? So this is kind of like a thing that, on one hand, you think it's a kabuki theater. It's the theater of the absurd. These people, anti-Semites, they hate everything, not only Jews. I mean, Trump even told us years ago that the only way he likes Jews is short people with yarmulkes who count his money. Otherwise, he doesn't trust anybody. So the trope of the Jews and money was reinforced by him, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But a lot of people listen to him. So it's kind of like, and the issue that you mentioned something about the BDS, we should continue. They did something very clever in about 10 states in the United States. The right-wing lobby of Israel made BDS illegal to the point that you can actually punish people, close organization, put a lot of burden as far as fines from the judges and all that. So this is another way to mix the whole ball, and most people cannot tell you the difference. So in other words, you can say, I'm a Jew, but I'm an anti-Zionist, or I'm a Zionist. For most people, it doesn't make sense. They say, what do you mean? You're a Jew, you're a Zionist. There's no other option. No, there are options, and you mentioned one of them, the ultra-Orthodox in 48. David Ben-Gurion had to bribe them, promising them a lot of things, including money and autonomy, for them to join the State of Israel and sign the Declaration of Independence. The anti-Zionist Agudat Israel did not want to establish the State of Israel in 1948. It was a coercion that got them in. They still don't recognize the Zionist State of Israel. Anyhow, I can mention the other name that you should have said is Noam Chomsky. Chomsky is definitely not a Zionist, and he made the whole thing very clear and very eloquently, and yet people who don't know anything never heard about him. So thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate it.
No question, Uri. Okay.
No. I said I have comments. I don't have questions. I listened to a lot of what he said. I learned a lot because I don't know the whole scene of the academic scene. That's not my forte.
Yeah.
Tony.
Yeah, Alan, I like the historical juncture that you made between the two things. There are a couple of observations, and I'd like to know what your take is on them. The first one is the Democrats have done that anticipatory. What was the word that you used? Anticipatory deference. Yeah, the Democrats appear to have done a similar thing, and they have absolutely no concerted response. So those suggestions that you're making can also apply in the political realm. I also like very much the idea of getting together with other groups, even if they have a difference with you. That what Uri just pointed out about from the river to the sea is in the charter of Likud, and has been used over and over again. I have been talking to Palestinian friends and suggesting to them that if they're going to use the phrase, why not say, from the river to the sea, Palestinians should be free, as a modification on that. But at any rate, and Schumer has himself just published a book on anti-Semitism in the United States. So, who knows where it's going to go? The anti-Semitism has just been overlooked by everybody. It's going on all the time. It's the people who, attacked the synagogue in Pittsburgh, and the fellow who just got convicted for stabbing the Palestinian kids 16 times. That's the real anti-Semitism that is coming out, and nobody wants to talk about it. And finally, the last thing is what you have left out, and I think I'd like to have you address it. It's the Israel lobby. It's the money from AIPAC and other groups that is going to Congress, that is essentially making them allies in this whole anti-Semitic thing. And I'd like to get your take on that.
Well, on the Israel lobby, I think the most important thing to understand is that it's financed by Christian Zionists, overwhelmingly financed by Christian Zionists, and Israel understands that, and they invited one of the leaders of Christian Zionism to Israel to give the blessings when they moved the American embassy and so on. So it's so people should be aware that sometimes people accidentally refer to it as the Jewish lobby. It's not the Jewish lobby; it's the Christian Zionist lobby. Of course, wealthy pro-Israel Jews do support, but it's very dangerous. And now they have a number of the figures associated with it in the top leadership of the government. And Huckabee, for example, is a complete lunatic. And the thing about the Christian Zionists is you have to understand they are anti-Semitic. They have one interest in supporting Israel. They want all the Jews to go to Israel. And then on the day of judgment, Jews will have a chance to either convert or be destroyed. And that's it. That's not a very positive outlook. It's nothing to do with Jewish security. It's just to do with the decimation, the annihilation of Jews. So to see the Christian Zionists, the millions and millions of them in the U.S. and around the world too, as allies is completely bonkers and
Right.
tragic.
I think it's only 144,000 Jews will be allowed to convert, actually.
Right.
Okay, so we've got Dick and then Eric, and I'll raise my hand now because at some point I want to get my question in. Dick, what happened to
Okay,
Dick?
I'm concerned about the fact that there was in academia real anti-Semitism. I think it disappeared in the late 60s and the early 70s. And what we have now has no connection to it. And I'm thinking of glass ceilings for Jewish faculty members. They couldn't become department chairs. They couldn't become deans. They couldn't become college presidents. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, this was in North Dakota. There was a nearby college in Minnesota, and the president of that college was Jewish. He was one of the few Jewish presidents in the entire academia, 3,000 colleges at the time. There were
Dick, was that Bemidji?
no, this was at Morehead State University.
Oh, okay.
There was I have a list of things over here. There was admissions. There was numerous clauses, especially at Ivy League schools. They disappeared probably maybe in the 50s or the 60s. There was fraternities and sororities. I mean, even now you still have Jewish fraternities and sororities, even though they're not really needed, but they were at one time necessary because there was so much discrimination against the Jews. And another thing that I've thought of that isn't really quite like this, it would be the absence of Jewish-oriented courses. Now you can have Hebrew, you can study Yiddish, you can study Jewish history, Jewish literature. All of these are they've probably become standard offerings. So how does the new anti-Semitism, as it's called, compared to this old anti-Semitism? That's the question I have.
Well, yeah, I think you're right about the campus situation. The campuses that they're targeting and where they're claiming there's relentless anti-Semitism are heavily Jewish. I mean, if you look at the number of Jewish students at Columbia University, it's at least a quarter in the undergraduates and maybe even more in the graduate program. And the number of Jewish faculty and administrators is very high. So the idea that this is a place hostile to Jews doesn't make sense. As I suggested before, that the reason it's being attacked is actually because it's a Jewish cosmopolitan location with a lot of debate and diversity and openness. The best qualities of Judaism are actually on display in a place like Columbia. And the idea of taking millions of dollars away from it is just going to hurt the Jewish students and faculty. So it's a sick use of anti-Semitism for other motives. The situation is similar at many of the other leading schools. Here at Michigan, there's a very large percentage of Jews among the undergraduates. So it must be 18% or something, or maybe even higher. And among the Jewish faculty, the idea that Jews are persecuted here at Michigan, and we've been singled out, and our administration is caving in, it's just a joke. Now, I'm sure there are some incidents that could be called anti-Semitic, and I'm sure that some Jewish students are frightened and upset by these demonstrations that they don't understand. And part of the reason is the indoctrination that the Jewish community went through after the '67 war and in the '70s. Fortunately, I didn't experience that. I was in Hebrew school in the 1950s. My parents took me to Israel. I saw that there was discrimination. I said to my dad, who was the president of the synagogue, that it looks like Jim Crow. And he said, well, you may be right. I mean, it wasn't that kind of extreme indoctrination. It was pro-Israel, but it wasn't this lunacy that overtook the Jewish community in the late 20th century. And what you see now are these kids who are so indoctrinated in these myths about Israel. I mean, these are kids who join the IDF, and they go on these birthright tours and so on. They find out they've been lied to, and they're angry. They've been deceived. And I've talked to some of the Jewish students here who've been arrested for their protests and so on. They come from families that indoctrinated them, and they're very angry. And unfortunately, that makes it somewhat hard to deal with them politically because they are angry. And when you're angry, you don't think clearly about strategically what's the most effective way to win people over. And so we do see in the movement some ultra left tactics and strategies that I think backfire. But the anti-Semitism exists, but as you say, it's nothing like it was before in the universities.
Well, it seems to me that what they allege to be anti-Semitism has nothing to do with what existed before. I don't see any connection between what I saw when I was an undergraduate and what they claim is the case now. It's like two different types of, two different phenomena completely.
I think that's true as a generalization. I do think that there are probably some schools in the South and other regions where Jews are seen as weird, and there are stereotypes about money and stuff like that, and phrases like, Jew down and stuff like that are being used, but it's nothing like it was before.
Hey, Eric, and then Gideon, and then me. I'm going to hold my question for everyone else. So Eric and then Gideon.
Well, just on this last point, I think the big difference is that, many years ago, it was, anti-Semitism in the ways that we of our generation understood it. I think today what we see mostly is anti-Israelism. And some people interpret that as anti-Semitism. But actually, this is not entirely off point to what I was going to say. And without wanting to divert the discussion here, I'm a little self-conscious of that, but I had a rather disturbing incident just yesterday where I attended a session about International Women's History Month, and it was at what I would call a far left group. We could have discussions about what far left means, but anyway, there was a woman who represented Palestine. She was of Palestinian background herself, who actually was making the claim that that the fight of the Palestinians to reclaim the Israel, the land of Palestine that the Israelis, that the settler colonialists occupied, must go on, and their objective was to force the Zionists, she didn't use the word Jews, force the Zionists out of the land, off the land completely, with the possible exception of some of the Palestinian Jews who were there originally and with whom the Arabs seemingly got along pretty well. I don't know how many of those are still left, but and she claimed that the rest of the world would just have to take them in. They have plenty of places to go. Everyone would welcome these emigres from Israel. And I spoke up, claiming that I didn't think the rest of the world would so happily accept these these Jewish refugees. But in any case, what I, when this woman said, I don't care what happens to them, just as long as I leave, I expressed some dismay that, someone could take that attitude towards, what is, a population of 7 million people or so, and just dismiss their fate without contradicting any of the claims that she was making about the genocide happening in Israel, which I totally agreed with. And I'm wondering if and I interpret this as genuine anti-Semitism, not just anti-Israelism, because if you have the idea of kicking 7 million people out of the country that willy-nilly, like all settler colonial states, including our own, we're here and they're not going to, and we're not going to go anywhere. And there is no place to go. You could say that for Australia, New Zealand, any number of places. So I just felt so dismayed by the lack of care for human beings and for human life, in this case of the people of Israel. And I just wonder if you have some experience, or any of us have some experience in confronting that kind of anti-Semitism, which I think is real in certain sectors. There are people who do not want peace. In fact, that was specifically a point that she made. She's not looking for peace. She's looking for the Jews to leave. And I'm still feeling a little dismayed by that encounter. And I wonder if other people might have some ways. I mean, should we just avoid such people and such groups and concentrate on the groups that we can talk to, or are there approaches that are useful and productive when confronted with these attitudes?
Alan, do you have a comment?
Well,
I do.
I believe the story because I haven't had that kind of encounter, but I've read about it. And the book by Lorber on solidarity and anti-Semitism and so on. He also describes a number of different kinds of incidents where there is anti-Semitism to some degree in the left movement that has to be addressed. It's more often conspiracy theories. But in this case, I think the important thing to me is, well, first of all, the facts are that from what I've read, that 50% of the population of Jews in Israel, and probably far more so in the settlements, is comprised of Jews who fled from Arab countries that were forced out in the early 1950s. 50% of either the descendants of those people or are the original people who were kicked out. They don't have any place to go. And so we have to have a solution that gives equality and rights to everybody. But I think that kind of anti-Semitism that she's expressing there is a hatred of Jewish settlers because of what they've done in this particular case. It's not the ancient hatred. It's not Nazism. It doesn't go back to the Roman Empire or Greece, where anti-Semitism supposed to begin in Greece and so on. It has to do with a specific situation. So if we can change the situation of oppression, there's the best chance of anti-Semitism of that type of Jew hatred and fear of Jews dissolving. I mean, this question is actually, Peter Beinart writes about this in his new book. He talks about how the Protestants in Ireland were terrified of the Catholics. They were going to, kill them all and so on. The whites in South Africa were terrified. But once the oppression was removed, in fact, there's relative peace in both those countries. I know Trump is claiming that the whites are being persecuted, but there's relative peace when oppression is removed. And I think that's our best hope for that situation.
Let me just point out that the Israelis and the Jewish establishment, AIPAC and ADL and so on, have made a point of conflating Jews in Israel. And when people like this woman that you came across, Eric, does that, she was pushed into, that was taught to her by the Jews themselves, or many, the Jewish establishment and the Israeli Jews themselves. Okay, Gideon.
So I have to say I'm somewhat bothered by you and even in Eric's question downplaying anti-Zionism / Semitism in university. You treated it like it's It's not material and it's not a problematic, okay? It's a minority, and I have to say, you even apologizing for blaming somebody like this. To me, it exists, and we need to address it. And I believe, somebody that's traveled in leftist organization, there is anti-Semitism in on the left, which is a serious problem for us. Now, I think, and really looking at this and trying, so my daughter is a Zionist, and my grandkids probably will be Zionist. Should I be worried about their safety in colleges and university or not? Because that's, I think, why a lot of Zionists worried about calling this anti-Semitism. They don't feel safe in colleges, especially in the Columbia and the Yale and those area, Berkeley. So I am a little bit worried that we, as leftists, downplaying this hatred that we see. Okay, now how would you feel? I mean, you definitely expressed your view as anti-Zionist. Are you condoning violence against them or stopping them from teaching at colleges? What is your views on this?
Are you asking a specific question?
I'm trying to say, you're saying anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism.
Right.
So, but people is anti-Zionist mean that a Jewish that are Zionists cannot study, cannot teach, can promote it, going to be. How would you say the treatment of anti-Zionism Jews in colleges is?
Well, first of all, I mean, as I pointed out in my presentation, there are varieties of different kinds of Zionism. They're not all identical. Personally, I am anti-Zionist. I would have some sympathy for the what's called cultural Zionism of Martin Buber and Hannah Arendt and so on, except for the fact that once the state was established, they completely capitulated and went along with it, and they dropped their earlier views. And there's some evidence that this cultural Zionism, in fact, in a way, implicitly aided political Zionism in coming to power. So I'm not in any sense a Zionist, but I understand there are different strains, and I understand there's a lot of confusion about the definition. Many people think of themselves as Zionists because they remember the Holocaust, and they believe you need a state to protect Jews. That's the only way. They don't think clearly about the problem of what kind of state, and that a state can endanger people if it behaves in a certain way. So Zionism is complex in terms of is whether there can be left-wing anti-Semitism. I think the issue is that anti-Zionism by itself is not a complete position. You can be anti-Zionist for many reasons. And there probably are, and there certainly are, Jew haters who are also anti-Zionist. But right now, most of the Jew haters are supporting Israel, but there are some who are anti-Zionist. So I'm not simply an anti-Zionist. I'm also a socialist internationalist. I think you have to be for something positive as an alternative. And I think that you have to separate being against Zionism from what you are for, and you have to combine two positive things. So.
Okay. I mean, you did not answer the question to my satisfaction. I'm saying what is the material impact of being anti-Zionist? How does this relate to Jewish people that's coming to colleges and they are Zionists? Are they to be kicked out from colleges? I'm hearing stories and reading that make me think if my granddaughter will go in 7 years to college, should I be worried about their safety as a Zionist, not as a Jew, as a Zionist?
Yes, I'm not aware that this is an issue. It seems to me the campuses are overwhelmingly supportive of Zionists. Some of the protests, it's true, sound threatening to Zionists, But the campuses themselves, the administration is not going to turn down somebody because they're a Zionist. They're more likely to turn them down for being Palestinian or anti-Zionist. I mean, not a realist issue.
It's not I'm disagreeing, but I think I will let it go at this.
Well, let me point out that during the Vietnam War, if you traveled in Europe as an American, and I was one of those kids that hitchhiked around Europe and so on, you couldn't carry an American flag. You had to carry a Canadian flag because people hated, you were an American against the war, but people hated the United States, and if they thought you were an American, they would be hostile to you. That's something you had to live with. I think that's the same way for somebody now who's Jewish, who is may not agree with everything the Israeli state's saying, but they have to pay a price because Israel is claiming that it's representing all Jews. So that's why we have to build groups like Jewish Voice for Peace to show that Jews are not in agreement with the Israeli state. You can't make that quick equation.
Okay.
But if you support the Israeli state, yeah, you're going to have to pay a price because the Israeli state's committing genocide. Just like if you supported the United States or South Africa when they were in colonial wars or instituting apartheid, you pay a price for having bad politics.
Okay.
Sally, I'm going to give you the floor in a second, but let me just point out, I would say that Peter Beinart is Zionist, but sits in the same room as all of us, as against the evils of apartheid.
Peter's Beinart is ambiguous. I watched his presentation here in Ann Arbor last week, and the first question, which he did not answer, and this is a guy who claims I'll answer anything. Somebody got up and said, "Well, why don't you just say you're an anti-Zionist?" And he just kind of evaded it. So he doesn't say he's an anti-Zionist, but he doesn't really say he's currently a Zionist. He says in the past he was a liberal Zionist, and he has some sympathy for the cultural Zionists and so on, but he's not really forthright about that. And if you read the interviews with him, he says very clearly that in his approach to politics is to focus on content and not labels. So he didn't actually call the assault on Gaza a genocide, but everything he said made it sound like a genocide. He just didn't use the word because he doesn't want to inflame people. And I think that's the same issue with Zionism. So as I see his political position for a one-state Israel that's with democratic rights for everybody, that's not Zionism. It's not a Jewish privileged state. And he doesn't even want it to be called Israel, which, the term was used because it refers to the Jewish people. So I think objectively, Beinart is not a Zionist, but he doesn't say I'm anti-Zionist. He doesn't, wear it on his sleeve, as they say.
Okay, we're going to go to Sally Shaw and then Robin. You don't have to hold your hand up. I'll get you after Sally. So Sally, the floor is yours.
All
And
right.
then
I just wanted to respond to Gideon because I think that if your grandchildren are there, they might be in the minority politically, but there's always been kids in colleges who are in the minority politically, and they find their own kind, and some of them stay where they are, and that's an age where people are in a fluid time of their lives and learning. But there's a huge difference, and we've talked about it a bit in the chat, between discomfort and safety. And they might feel uncomfortable, but whether their safety is in question is a whole different thing. So, I mean, most of us, if we're not uncomfortable, we're not stretching ourselves. I hope that most of us are uncomfortable and grappling with it and trying to reconcile to some extent, or maybe learning to live with discomfort and ambiguity. But the point is, I don't think their safety is in question. And so if they're in a minority, they're in a minority. And by the time they're there, they might be in the majority. Thank you.
I didn't hear a question there. So,
No,
there was no question. I was just responding to Gideon.
right.
okay. Do you want to comment, Alan or Gideon,
That's
before we
fine.
go to Robin?
No, I think we can continue.
Okay, Robin, it's your floor.
So I just happened to hear Peter Boehnert speak just about a week ago. And it was quite fascinating, maybe 10 days ago. It was fascinating because he still can't bring himself to say anti-Zionist. Now he's now clearly defined himself as a non-Zionist. Not sure what the distinction is, but that's the term that he was using. And while he didn't put the word genocide in his new book, he definitely said it out loud in the period that we were taught, that he was addressing this group. That's the first thing. The second, the question is to go back to Gideon, because I spent a lot of time on college campuses and have two kids who both just came off of college campuses and who describe themselves as being strongly for Palestinian freedom, for lack of not to label it. And they were always, as much as they might be vocal, there might be Jewish Voice for Peace on campus or another organization, nevertheless, they were in the minority. And every time they had a demonstration or they did something to raise awareness of the plight that Palestinians, especially in Gaza, were in, there was double or triple the number of students against them, not to mention the parents of those students against them, and the administration support and security support. So I wonder if what you're feeling is anxiety that your child might have to defend her position, that she might be discomforted by doing it. But I have to agree with what Sally said. I just don't see the safety issue as being a thing on college campuses. What do you think?
Definitely. I know the feeling. All my life, I was in college and being the minority leftist in Israel. So I know what does it mean to be minority and to feel. And I'm not talking about discomfort. I mean, excuse me, but if I say I know the difference between discomfort and between safety, and I'm worried about safety. Even Alan just said, if you support Israel, you have to suffer the consequences, which could be violent. So I'm saying being a Zionist doesn't make you blood cheap. It doesn't make you a violent target of people in campuses. And that's what you hear people talking about, that they are not discomfort, they're afraid for their safety. They hear comments that's not describing Zionists, describing Jewish people. And I think that is where my problem is with what you were saying, because it looks like you're downplaying the danger and the risk of being a Zionist Jew on campuses.
Robin, Alan?
Well, I think you've gotten completely turned around, but there's no way to prove it one way or another. But the minority who are in trouble, clearly, as we're seeing what's going on now, are the minority that are saying this is wrong, what Israel's doing is wrong. They are in the minority. They're the ones who are having their rights taken away, not the other way around.
I'm not disputing it. I'm just trying to say that's my view, ignoring and downplaying anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. It's a risk and a problem, because being around those leftist organizations, I saw a lot of anti-Semitism. Not to mention when I was in JVP member many years ago, I saw a lot of anti-Mizrahi Jews there. So that's a conversation for another time.
Okay, before I give the floor to Dick and Tony, which will be their second round, let me ask my question. And Alan, can you elaborate a little bit about how the 1950s Red Scare ended and how the country sort of got back to a more even keel?
Well, I mean, the political climate nationally changed. McCarthy himself was discredited. The political situation and around the world changed. It wasn't because the resistance on the campuses won the battle. I mean, they didn't win the battle. There are a few people were reinstated, and there were apologies. Although the apologies were not as extensive as you might think. But generally, it was a rout at the time, and when the national political climate changed, then the witch hunt led up not only in the universities but in Hollywood and the rest of society. Let me say that it was a tough fight in the 1950s to be a communist, because you were defending a society that itself didn't, the Eastern Bloc did not represent any kind of academic freedom and so on. You were in a tough situation. I don't think we're in that situation today, because I think that the anti-Zionists are correct. I think we have a good fight. I think the facts are on our side. Somebody pointed out about this confusion about what Judaism and Zionism are. But I find when I read the books, if I actually read the books, even by people who are not anti-Zionist, the facts are in there. You know, for example, that Zionism is something that grew up in the nationalist period of the early 19th century, whereas Judaism, you know, is 4,000 years old and so on. You know, I think that we're in a much stronger situation to win.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, does anyone else have a first round question, Ellie or Assem or someone like that? Then we'll go to Dick.
Yeah, I would, am I muted? I guess not. Okay. I would like to respond to Gideon. I've been around in left-wing groups ever since I was an undergraduate at the University of Michigan, by the way, where the SDS was very active, and at the University of Washington and at UCLA. I have never encountered what you call left-wing anti-Semitism. How did I miss it? I was at 3 major campuses, all of which had major movements. I've been as a non-college student, I've been very active in left-wing groups. I've never encountered any kind of anti-Jewish thing. And I've often talked about my Jewish background with people who are opposed to nationalism. So maybe you mean people who are critical of nationalism, which some left-wing groups are, most left-wing groups are not. But so that's just the point that I want to make.
Yeah,
the other thing,
it's a new thing, so it's not old. And when I give you an answer, the Answer Coalition is a very anti-Semite.
well, how are they anti-Semitic? I mean, I don't agree with some nationalism, but I don't. What is anti-Semitic about the Answer Coalition?
I went to the demonstration many years ago, and the way they were blaming Jewish people for the war in Iraq, that's a problem for me. If you are conflating, if you on the left conflating Jews and Zionists or Jews and Israeli, and then that's to me where anti-Semitism is.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've never experienced that. I've seen a lot of things from the Answer Coalition, so I can't possibly connect what you've said to anything that I've ever observed.
Okay.
I just want to add one more point. At UCLA, there was a very violent group where the vigilantes, many of them were Israelis, many of them were from the IDF, who attacked the demonstration. The group that was there for the first 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. I was there with Standing Together, and we stood in the middle and tried to.
Right. So you've seen who are the victims. The Jewish students were not the victims unless they were in JVP. They're the only Jews who I've ever seen who have been victims of violence or discrimination were the ones who were anti-Zionist. I've never seen any. I can't think of any examples of people who are pro-Israel or Zionists who have experienced any kind of violence or discrimination. It doesn't exist. I think it's a myth created by.
It's not. I mean, okay, that's not my talk, and I'm not going to argue about it, but I would love to do in maybe another chat, Jeff, where we can talk about it. I mean, to me, I can see it, and I'm not as sensitive to this because, again, I grew up leftist in Israel, which make you immune to a lot of discomfort. So.
Unmute, Jeff.
I was just going to say, Robin, are you trying to talk or you're just okay?
Jeff, you need to unmute.
If you're muted.
I was just going to say I agree with Dick and Gideon because I've also felt that answer was anti-Semitic. Anyway, Tony, it's your floor.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Ralph Nader interviewed Peter Beinart about his new book on it came out on Saturday. If you go to Ralph Nader Radio Hour, you can hear it. And since I subscribed to it, I got some extra material at the end, but it's very clear that Beinart is a very, very observant Jew. He wakes up in the morning, he puts on his gear, he reads a section from the Torah, he thinks about it, he writes about it, he follows the dietary customs, and he makes it quite clear that that's it. I cannot remember exactly whether he talked about genocide, but I know that the phrase was used by Ralph Nader when he was interviewing him and asking questions. And of course, the book is Israel after Gaza. So, he's talking about it as a major turning point. And the other thing is, Alan, I wonder if you would maybe talk about the connection that I seen between McCarthy and the current situation, which is McCarthy's lawyer,
Yeah.
who trained Donald Trump.
A lot of the style of Trump seems to remind me of McCarthy. I mean, even a weird way he talks and so on. But yes, Roy Cohn was Trump's mentor and idol, and he was a big figure in McCarthyism.
Yeah.
If there are no other questions, then I'd like to thank our speaker, Alan Wald, who gave us a really great presentation and is up pretty late, and it must be near midnight for him. And
True.
so we thank him for that.
Right.
And I will contact you tomorrow or later tonight about your honorarium. In about 2 hours, I'll have the recording out online. And let me remind you that on Sunday, the 20th of April at 10 in the morning, Jeff Halper will talk about normalization in Israel, Palestine, and what it means for apartheid. He did an essay about that about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's going to be a very interesting presentation.
What time is that, Jeff?
10 a.m. Sunday, the 20th.
Sunday morning. Okay.
The 20th of April.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Very good talk.
Okay, good night.
Good night.